Alright, hey there, it's Pete, coming at you with Wiki number 9. In this Wiki, we are discussing measurement and assessments. So, number 1 is summarize what you have learned in this section in 1 to 3 sentences and explain why it's important for educators to understand it. So in this section, we really focused on what some key components are involved in the creation and administration of assessments. Some of which we covered were balancing the relationship between the dynamic of being a fair assessment versus being a practical assessment, along with creating a reliable assessment, which is something that measures the same every time, versus having a valid assessment, which means it tests specifically what it's meant to test. Along with this, we learned more in depth about different characteristics and dialectics between certain kinds of evaluations, such as formal versus informal evaluations, formative versus summative, traditional versus alternative, standardized versus teacher-developed, and criterion referenced versus norm referenced evaluations. One last thing we learned that was really important is we discussed why it's important to even have assessments in the first place, which virtually what we kind of came to conclusion was that you need assessments to test how effective your teaching strategies are. You need to know how well your strategies are working, how well your instruction's getting through, and the only way to know this is to see how well your students do in assessments and evaluations. Number 2 is identify 1 or 2 specific concepts related to the CPC problem you chose and explain how these concepts play a role in or relate to the problem. One concept specifically involved in my CPC problem and everyone's is validity. One of the toughest challenges in our CPC paper is coming up with assessment strategies because not only do we need something that's innovative, original, we need something that is valid, which means it tests accurately what it's supposed to be testing. It's not just testing over something that is not something you care about. So if we don't have valid assessments, we're not really going to be determining how effective our interventions are in the CPC problems. Number 3 is how could you address this part of your problem / what part of your intervention will relate to this aspect of the problem. I think in general the best way to address validity regarding your intervention is to keep assessments in mind whenever you're brainstorming different potential interventions. So whenever you think of an intervention strategy, kind of on the side, brainstorm how many ways could I assess to make sure that this is an effective strategy, because you don't want to choose a strategy if there's no way for you to find out if it's really working or not, because then you could just be using a strategy that's null and void and you're not really helping out your students in that situation. So, all right.